Hello, welcome back to the goalkeeper.com podcast. With you today is me, Sam Hudspeth, and our data guru, man with the numbers and the keeper of the stats, facts, and math, Dr. John Harrison. John, how are you doing?
Hey, hi, hello, thank you. Yeah, I'm great. Can't wait to get stuck into the podcast.
No, fantastic. Well, great to have you back on as always. We do see each other every day, but nonetheless, it's always a pleasure. Coming up in today's episode, we're going to have a look at some of the best kits of World Cups gone by and see if they compare to any of the ones in this year's tournament. John's going to present us some of the best data moments from the tournament so far, all the analytics, stats, and other bits of a number behind some of the greatest moments, saves, and mistakes, and what have you going forward. Likewise, moving over to Twitter, the battlefield of humanity, we're going to have a look at one of the best exchanges we've seen so far on the internet. Penalties, are England in safe hands if it goes to penalty shootout in the next few rounds? Well, John's got the numbers and we'll wait and see. And then finally, which glove brands are making their way through the tournament in Qatar in good fashion and which have we had to say goodbye to so far? But John, it's been an interesting start to the tournament. I would say one very much dominated by goalkeepers. What have you made of the state of goalkeeping in Qatar so far?
Yeah, I think it's been really fun, really interesting World Cup. So many goalkeeping talking points happening so far, but we've had some, unbelievable performance from Gonda into the Japan goal when Japan upset Germany, and then Aloisi in the Saudi goal when Saudi Arabia beat Argentina, and Courtois. Actually, now if you look back at it, that Courtois performance against Canada was huge because Belgium could have actually gone out and have not won a game if it wasn't for Courtois then. So you've had some top class performances, but also some sort of weird moments and stuff, which we will get to throughout the podcast. There's been some big mistakes, and as always, pundits have piled in, but we're sort of here to make sure that we don't just analyse the mistakes, we also show the good goalkeeping that's happened. So I think it's been a pretty positive tournament so far for goalkeepers, and let's see what happens in the knockouts.
No, I totally agree, John. Lee Dixon may think otherwise, but we'll get on to that in good time. You mentioned Gonda, Japan's goalkeeper. It's had an interesting tournament so far. Obviously making some really big saves, but likewise quite a big error as we'll see going forward. But speaking of Japanese goalkeepers, let's get straight into kits because Kawaguchi there in the third from the left with the flaming hot red, black, and orange shirt. I mean, what a combo that is. I can't work out exactly who the manufacturer was. I'm not sure if you've got any insight into that, John, but I mean, really, really standing out. Campos, of course, another classic. Lev Yashin in the far left hand corner with full black, classy, and then Dino Zoff in the bottom right. Another legend of the game in his grey, blue, and black kind of combo. John, take your pick. Which is your favourite?
Yeah, to be fair, of the wacky ones, it's definitely the Kawaguchi 98 flaming kit. I don't know, the Campos one's obviously iconic, but I think actually the flames do really work, and it doesn't actually look too horrendous as you could imagine. A lot of the stuff that got put on the printing room floor, I imagine, didn't look too great, but I think they did pull that one off. But yeah, for me, I do love the Lev Yashin one, like the 1966, just plain all black, no messing around. Is fun. But my favorite, weirdly, is the Casillas one. I think Adidas just did a great job with. If you'd have told me it would be like that weird green, blue, and then the sort of Spanish flag, I'd be like, I don't know if that'll work. But actually, it looks quite elegant and nice. And for me, I think that's the sort of kit I like. Like maybe weird colours, but if the style's looking nice and neat and sharp, it's gonna be a gorgeous number to wear.
Well, there we go, everyone. It's fashion advice from our very own Dr. John Harrison. I mean, one thing that is interesting about the Adidas kits in picture, obviously Neuer and Casillas in the two ones. Adidas obviously are infamous, like Nike, like Puma for their templated kits, and you tend to get quite a generic repetition year on year. It's quite nice to see with Casillas, I think, a slightly more unique template. You know, Neuer in 2014, we've got just below Buffon. Again, pretty standard goalkeeper jersey, but that does throw me back to grassroots football on a Sunday morning because I'm pretty sure every single team had a goalkeeper wearing a kit like that had been washed probably 700 times. The number was peeling off the back, and no doubt it was seven sizes too big for the young lad between the sticks. But nonetheless, it does suit Neuer. I mean, Buffon in the gold, it's polarizing for me. I'm just not sure it really works. What a tournament it was for him, of course, and a famous kind of run for Buffon, but not sure about the shirt.
Yeah, it did go really well with the gold gloves and stuff, but it was I think I'd like it if there wasn't that weird V-neck and made it look like he was wearing a vest underneath with an Italy badge on. I think otherwise, I think it's really nice. If it had just been a normal like circular neckline with the Italy badge there, but all still in gold, I think it would have probably worked. But yeah, it is a bit of an odd looking one.
No, of course, and then just Jorge Campos. Little needs to be said, really. Perhaps one of the most iconic kits ever worn at a World Cup. Campos, obviously one of the shortest goalkeepers to ever play the game, making up for any lack of presence, although that is a debatable term. Most definitely with his with the kind of flair coming through on that kit. I mean, I think I've seen 4 or 5 different angles of that exact photo, and in each one the kit still looks absolutely fantastic. So definitely another one in there that I'm having a closer look at, and I'd love to see someone replicate that. I'd love to see it come out in another tournament. I mean, next year, for example, Mexico, US, sorry, not next year, but in 2026, Mexico, the USA, and Canada obviously hosting the World Cup jointly. And I reckon Mexico need to pull that goalkeeper kit back out just for the banter.
100%, I agree.
Yeah, I think it'll be brilliant. But yeah, I wouldn't say that any of the kits I've seen so far at the tournament this year stand up to any of these personally. Maybe being a bit of a bit miserable in that sense, but you've got to give credit where credit's due, right? And these are some of the best that we've picked out from tournaments gone by. But John, away from our fashion advice, and let's get into the data. Because over the group stage, you've been compiling a plethora of numbers covering virtually every save, clearance, shot-stopping moment, one-on-one moment, cross-claiming moment, sweeping moment that possibly could be measured with the goalkeeper XG. And we picked out a number of the best saves so far, a number of the worst goals conceded so far, and likewise an overall view of who are the best shot stoppers at the World Cup so far from the group stages. So, John, feel free to talk us through the first slide.
Yeah, no, indeed. So this is, as you said, we'll concentrate on shot stopping in this podcast. We might go through some of the other areas of goalkeeper XG in subsequent podcasts, because we do look at literally every action a goalkeeper makes. But if we just concentrate on sort of the main one, and indeed the most important one, shot stopping, this is how the goalkeepers have performed so far in the FIFA World Cup. And just to explain the graphic, on the y-axis, the vertical axis, that's just how valuable they've been to their team in goals, and all that is their number of saves minus the number of saves you'd expect them to make. And expected saves works basically like this: you look at historical shots and you find out the probability of a certain shot going in. So the way I like to think about it is, if you've got a shot from 40 yards going straight down the middle at like 25 miles an hour, that is going to go in like 1 in 1,000 times when the keeper's massively out of position or something weird's happened. But basically, every professional keeper is just scooping that up. Whereas, I don't know, a volley from 6 yards into the top corner at 60 miles an hour is going to go in 99.99% of the time or whatever. So when you look at a keeper now, you can look at the shots they face, and using the build-up, the shot location, where the defenders are, the shot trajectory, the shot speed, you can then analyze, well, how likely is it that an average keeper would make that save? And then when you do that, you can then look at all the shots the keepers faced and see, did they save what you'd expect them to? So that's really how this all works. So you can see at the top we have Wojciech Szczesny, which is not surprising if you've watched all his games. He's made 2 penalty saves, made 2 one-on-one saves, and he was only beaten twice, both against Argentina. So that we have him as basically making 2 saves more than he would be expected to. If you put an average keeper in Poland's goal, they'd have conceded 2 more goals, and then most likely they would be out of the tournament and not playing France in the round of 16. So that's been an absolutely huge performance from Szczesny. And a couple of the other ones at the top, we've sort of mentioned before, but Aloisi of Saudi Arabia, Courtois and Gonda, all 3 of them making big saves at big moments. Aloisi in particular made a huge save against Argentina when the ball just fell. He was mispositioned on the other side of goal. It had been a cross, threw himself across goal and made a wonderful save. And Courtois obviously had that penalty save against Canada, and then 2 clean sheets in the tournament. It was just that Morocco game that knocked them out in the end. On the other end of the spectrum, not so great World Cups for the Canadian goalkeeper Bojan or Hosseini with Iran, or Navas at Costa Rica. But Navas is an interesting one, because actually our shot-stopping model had him as an above-average performance, saving more than you'd expect against both Germany. Against Germany, but whereas against Spain in the 7-0, that really has crippled him, because against Germany and Japan, nailed it, did really well, but of the 7 goals he let in, about 3 were probably his mistake, and that meant that overall he's coming out as costing Costa Rica just over 2 goals.
It's interesting to hear, John, because obviously as we'll come see, as you mentioned with Navas, he has made one of the saves of the tournament so far. I think it's also important to stress, guys, that the table we're showing here at the time of recording is based on the group stages. So any adjustments to be made for the round of 16 aren't included here. Just to point that out. But John, I mean, coming on to some of the best saves so far, we've spoken about Navas, we've spoken about Gonda. Interestingly, two of the best saves have come against Germany, who, as one of the biggest nations in the World Cup this year, are already heading out. Talk us through Navas.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that definitely says something about Germany getting a little bit unlucky, really. Like, we can all sit there and be like, oh, they weren't good enough, but actually they created a lot of big chances and a few goal swings their way, and they wouldn't have been knocked out. But yeah, this Navas save was absolutely unbelievable, really. So if you didn't see the clip, what happens here is there's a low cross across the box. Navas is at one side of the goal, and you've got Fulkerg running in to just hammer the ball in, and he gets a great contact with it, meets it perfectly square. Navas dives full stretch and then gets a top hand to the ball. I think it may be a bit of top hand, bit of shoulder, and flicks it onto the bar. And our model at goalkeeper.com basically understands that that repositioning. So the optimum position for the cross was over near the near post, and then the optimum position for the shot is way past at the other side. So it knows that that's really difficult to save and would only get saved about 17% of the time. And Navas managed to be part of that 17% and pull this save off with just excellent footwork and a great decision to just spread him, smother, go across and just dive and get something on it. Because a lot of the time at this World Cup, we've seen these forced out of position shots and they've gone in because the keeper's just turned, sidestepped, and then tried to react and it's already past them. Whereas Navas sort of preemptively made a decision he's just going to have to dive across and make himself huge, and that did it perfectly. And I think we often say goalkeepers shouldn't gamble and they shouldn't sort of be like, I've just got to throw myself at it. But in certain situations, like sort of close range 1v1 situations like this one, actually you have to gamble, because if you try and trust your reactions, you're just going to get beaten every time. So this was a great, I guess, educated guess / gamble, whatever you want to call it, by Navas to just throw himself across. And yeah, what a save he made.
No, indeed. And I mean, Navas, it could be his last World Cup, really, already in his kind of mid to late 30s. And some really fantastic performances over the years, obviously in 2014 with Costa Rica, putting him on the goalkeeping map, I would say, to an extent, and moving to Real Madrid and making an impact there. Navas as a goalkeeper, I think, has been unlucky in club football, especially. He's one of the most able out there, but he's always seemingly shafted for another younger, brighter, bigger name, perhaps, which is bizarre given that Navas, I would say, really is one of the most able goalkeepers in world football. He's, for me, consistently in the top five, and I think has demonstrated that on a domestic level. So it is a shame to see him going out, without sort of the last hurrah. But of course, John, as we said before, it's not just been Navas making big saves against Germany, and Gonda, mentioned previously, has also come up really big. And in the early stage of the tournament, I believe goalkeeper XG's models did show Gonda to be the brightest goalkeeping prospect of the first round of matches. Of course, mistake that we'll talk about further on, but the saves that he's made, to be fair, have been really, really massive. And again, considering Germany have gone out, they have been tournament changing for Germany at least. So with his stop against the Germans, talk us through the expected save probability here.
Yeah, so this save, if you didn't see it, we've got a nice graphic up there showing it. But basically, cross came in, Serge Gnabry, bang, met it with a really powerful header low and into the corner. As you can see, that header's bounced and is coming back up. And it was just wonderful set position and then lightning reflexes to get across and touch it round. I think it's another one of those saves from headers that often get under-analysed by pundits. But really, what's happened here is Gonda's, as soon as he can't come for the cross, he's backpedaled backwards to get as close to his line as possible to maximize his reaction time. And then he's seen and fully read the header and he can push off and tip it around the post. It's one of those where if he stays a little bit higher, he probably just gives up on it and doesn't even dive for it. But that wonderful set position and positioning basically close to his goal line gives him all the reaction time and all the sort of propulsion he needs to get across and make the save. And yeah, at goalkeeper.com and goalkeeper XG, we basically find this save's only made about a quarter of the time. Like the majority of the time, this is going to fly into the back of the net. And as we've said before, Japan beat Germany in this game and caused one of the big shocks to the tournament. And Japan are now through to the last 16. So it was not just, great for Japan, but it was also hugely disappointing for Germany losing this game and Gonda pulling out this amazing save.
Of course, another nation that have headed through to the last 16 is Poland. And they have Szczęsny to thank. I think everyone is pretty clear on that one. Some massive performances from the Polish goalkeeper, including, an absolutely fantastic penalty save from Messi. And we're not just talking about a run-of-the-mill tip around the post. We're talking about a powerful top-hand save from, in my opinion, the best player in the world. Obviously, that's contentious, but a debate for another day. John, talk us through the penalty save.
Yeah, no, it was, as you said, it was absolutely wonderful. We've seen 5 penalty saves already, and we'll talk through those later. But this was the pick of the bunch, and our model found no difference. So it thinks this penalty save would only happen around 19% of the time. The majority of the time, keepers are either diving the wrong way, and when they do dive the right way, they probably won't get a strong enough hand on it to keep it out. But Szczesny did here, and yeah, it was just a really tidy penalty routine. Not too much movement before the penalty. Stayed calm. I think even there's a viral clip, I think, of him telling his Polish teammates to just calm down before it's all fine. It's going to be chill. It's only Messi. I'll be fine. And yeah, it was a great leap across, covered a lot of the goal. And then, yeah, the use of the top hand's perfect. I think it's one of those things where, as goalkeepers, a lot of penalties, and we'll discuss this later, are hit into the lower portion of the goal. So you do have to, there is no point sort of diving for that middle height because so many of them will then go under you. So Szczesny does the right thing, sort of diving low. And as long as you can utilize that top hand, it then still allows you to cover a decent proportion of the high part of the goal. So no, it was wonderful textbook technique from Szczesny. And one thing we should mention is he parried this out for a corner. So at Goalkeeper XG, we have a handling model that looks exactly at the probability of goals happening based on the parry locations and based on if the keeper catches it. And Szczesny actually did quite a poor parry on his other penalty save. It was a great penalty save. He did parry it straight back to a Saudi player, but then luckily, well, a bit of luck, a bit of great judgment, he got up quickly, made himself big and tipped the rebound over the bar. But here, he didn't even need to do that. There was no rebound. He put it out for a corner. So our handling model praised him highly for doing that. Because a lot of the time, as you'll know, just people who've watched the game and things, penalties, the rebounds get tapped in because they're hit so well and hit in the corner, keepers often parry them back out into danger. So the fact he parried it around for a corner, no one really talked about, but I think was a really excellent part of this save.
No, indeed. And I mean, moving on from the positive moments, John, we've got to look at some of the worst goals that have been conceded so far for balance, of course. Nobody likes seeing a goalkeeper get beat, let alone us at goalkeeper.com. But nonetheless, it's important to learn and see what we can improve from these types of situations. Gonda, a fantastic save against Germany, a not so fantastic piece of goalkeeping against Costa Rica. Talk us through this one, John.
Yeah, and this was the only shot he actually faced during the game, and they lost 1-0. So this is like, for all the people that have played in goal and done that, this is Gonda won't need us to go over this to feel bad about it. This was a really bad moment for him. And you can see just from this still one of the main issues, and that's how high his starting position is. So Fuller has hit it from that spot he's currently stood at, so just outside the box at the side of the D. And it's just a curling shot going straight down the middle of goal. And Gonda's got himself just a little bit too eager, a little bit too far down the line of the ball. It's one of those things that really you should be 2 to 3 yards off your line because you don't want to be right on your line because then you've got the whole of the goal to cover. And that's too much. You haven't cut off any of the angle. But if you're 2 or 3 yards up, that's fine. You've cut off some of the angle, but you've still got a lot of reaction time. Whereas Gonda here, by being 4.5, 5 yards off his line, he loses that extra few milliseconds that mean he can get a hand on it. And then actually what really happens here is he just mistimes his jump. If you watch the video clip, what happens is the curling shot happens, Gonda jumps up to catch it, and then he's already on his way down. The shot was a bit slower than he expected. In fact, at goalkeeper.com, we clock it in at only 42 miles an hour, which is way under the average shot speed. And he mistimes it. He's already going down as he tries to then get palms on it, and then he just doesn't get enough force because you can imagine anyone who's tried to jump up, if you receive the ball when you're already moving downwards, your weight distribution's all over the shot, and he just ends up palming it into the goal. And as you can see at goalkeeper.com, we think should be saved 97% of the time. There's only like a 3% of the time where something bad like this happens that this goes in. So it should have been just a bread and butter, easy, simple save. And it almost cost Japan, but I guess luckily for Japan and well played to Gonda for recovering in the subsequent games after the big mistake, they managed to get through. So it didn't cost them too badly.
No, of course. And I mean, whereas Gonda has, epitomized, I think, the underdog story, the kind of coming up big against the big boys, so to speak. He's also epitomized perhaps the most junior basic rule of goalkeeping that I think everyone's parents or coaches have said to them when they were stepping onto the Sunday League pitch for the first time at 5 or 6 years old. That you could have nothing to do in a game, and it's only that one moment that can change everything. Of course, also showing the intense pressure that goalkeepers have on them. And I think, although to us at goalkeeper.com and to all of you guys listening, that's a pretty basic statement to make. To some in the media, I don't think it is. And we'll come on to that in good time. But nonetheless, Steve Mandanda made an appearance at a major tournament for the first time in a while for France against Tunisia. And it didn't go quite to plan, did it, John?
No, indeed. Yeah, the loss to Tunisia probably wasn't on the cards for the French. Hopefully they'll just think we rotated a lot of players and it won't affect them going into the last 16. But yeah, this wasn't a great game from Mandanda, and this goal sort of summed it up. So if you can see from the still what's happening here, if you've seen it, Kazari of Tunisia goes on a bit of a mazy run from inside his own half. There's 3 or 4 French players around him as he gets just inside the box. But I think Mandanda sort of panics and thinks, oh, he's going to take another touch and go through one-on-one. I need to rush out and get near the ball. But actually, he doesn't do that. He ends up just toe poking a shot from like 16 yards out. But Mandanda's already closed the gap. I think he's about 7 or 8 yards off his line. And the way I like to think about this is he's now turned a 16, 15-yard shot into like an 8-yard shot by being so far off his line. So his reaction time is now all over the place. And Kazri ends up just toe poking it in the bottom corner. And it's the slowest goal so far at the FIFA World Cup that we've recorded of just 27 miles an hour. It was painfully slow rolling over the line. But because Mandanda's so high up, he goes with his foot. And I think I've seen people say it wasn't a foot save. But yeah, that's true. Obviously, if he's back in his box, he just dives down and catches it. And it's simple, but in his 6-yard box. But I think it was a foot save given how close he was to the ball. And it was his positioning that killed him rather than a technique thing. I think if he'd gone for it with his hands, it'd have squirmed under him. So, yeah, not a great bit of goalkeeping. And as you can see with the expected save probability, we've got it at 93%. The majority of the time, a keeper would just be back in the 6-yard box. The ball's getting pressured by a defender, and they just walk across and scoop it up. But yeah, Mandanda got his positioning horribly wrong, got way too far down the line of the ball, and it meant that the finish could beat him. So yeah, another one that wasn't too great, but a lot to learn from for goalkeepers and how really, when a player's running through, don't get tempted. If you've got covering defenders, try and stay deep for as long as possible and then rush out once you know they're through the line. Because if your defenders can do the pressure, you don't need to be up there applying it yourself.
No, indeed. And I mean, one of the key things taught in a one-on-one situation that I've always spoken about as being putting the onus on the attacker, but there's a time and place for that. And of course, as you mentioned, John, covering defenders do put a kind of extra dynamic into the mix. We're going to head back to Japan for the third time in this analytics presentation, but this time it's Japan scoring, not conceding, or being saved indeed. And it's Unai Simon for Spain. Obviously, Spain had actually in the end a rather hairy, way of making it through to the round of 16, finishing second in their group. But nonetheless, there's been some interesting performances from Simon so far. Obviously, very little to do against Costa Rica, but against Japan, it didn't quite go to plan. It's not the first time that Simon's been caught out, on the international stage in a big tournament. Of course, in the Euros against Croatia, there was a bit of a red face moment for him. It's important to remember that Simon is still fairly young. It's his second major tournament, and he seems to be the goalkeeper of choice for Spain. And I would say that undisputed may not be the right word just yet, but it is heading towards that if he can consolidate his performances in this tournament. But this goal really won't have done him much favours, will it, John?
No, not at all. And especially coming in a loss to Japan that luckily for Spain didn't affect them, but it did knock Germany out. This was sort of a classic case of something slightly different. It was basically about being sort of too energetic in his set position. If you watch the clip, it's a really well struck shot. We clock it in at about 68 miles an hour, but it is heading sort of straight down the middle of goal at like what you would call sort of waist-ish height, so not along the ground or high up. So it's not too difficult there in terms of being on the stretch. It should have been a straightforward, just palm away. It's powerful. You wouldn't have expected him to catch it or anything. But if you watch his set position, he jumps into it quite aggressively and swings his arms back, again, really aggressively. And an arm swing and a jump into the set isn't always an issue. Like if it's small and timed well, it can really help a goalkeeper. But here you basically see that Simon, and as you can see from the still, he flings his hands into the ball and then he's not in control of his motion. So he ends up just palming it straight up into the roof of the net. And because even though it's powerful, that's why this number isn't like in the 99%, because if it was straight down the middle at like cup catch height, it gets saved all the time. But the power on it does mean it still goes in about 12% of the time, but still we'd have expected it to be dealt with by an average keeper at this World Cup. So it's in our sort of top 3 worst goals. But for me, the learning lesson and the point for Simon is just about not getting anxious and not trying to do too much. So ideally, you could have a more neutral hand position and not swing them into it. But if you are going to perform an arm swing, just make sure it's timed well and not as aggressive, because when you're getting your hands to the ball, you need to be in control. You need to be guiding the parry. You can't just be throwing them, because then a little deviation in the ball trajectory, it can hit your wrist, hit your forearm, and it can just be in the roof of the net. So it'll be interesting to see if someone has any sort of similar mistakes going forwards, because potentially it could be, like you said, big moments in World Cups, people are anxious, and you can often exaggerate your motion, and that's exactly what it looked like happened to Simon here.
No, indeed, because the arm swing is a funny technical point. A lot of debate in recent years about whether it's beneficial to a goalkeeper to generate some momentum, whether it's nice to kind of retain some natural movement in your set position and your approach to shots. Likewise, technically speaking, it's not textbook, and of course that's a contentious phrase in itself. What really is textbook goalkeeping? But I think the majority wouldn't be teaching it, so to speak. Nonetheless, there's a case for kind of just staying calm, staying natural, staying flexible in what you're doing as a shot comes in. And I think Simon, like you say, has simply over exaggerated there. It's the same with somebody like Kepa, in his first season at Chelsea, similar goals coming from a similar technical error. But John, let's come away from the numbers quickly and let's get over to Twitter, everyone's favourite platform. It's the most brazen presentation of humanity, in my opinion, consolidated and adjudicated by none other than Elon Musk, which always makes it interesting. Lee Dixon has been a polarising name at this tournament so far on the commentary gantry, and described this save from Emi Martinez against Mexico as easy for him. Now, I'm not sure about you, Lee, but for me, making a top corner save, catching the ball with such, and let's be fair, Martinez did make it look easy, but it doesn't mean that it's easy for him. Movement across the goal, power step, getting two hands of the ball and catching the ball with that movement. Of course, you have to remember the ball that's being used at the World Cup this year has been, quoted as being one of the fastest and kind of nastiest footballs any goalkeeper could really face. And Martinez is coming for a bit of a battering over the tournament so far. And we'll get onto that in a second. But John, I mean, this is a save from Martinez that really is one to behold for the cameras.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think people often use camera save as like a derogatory negative thing. But for me, if you catch the ball, it can never really be a camera save, because to me, if I'm trying to think about what a camera save is, it's you make something look harder than it is. But if you catch it, you've literally done the best you could possibly do. You now have possession. You've regained possession from the opposition. So yeah, I think it's a beautiful photo, as we can see there. A great bit of technique, like you said, wonderful footwork, great to get two hands, and then the bravery to actually try and catch it. And I think when we run it through our goalkeeper XG handling model, basically 95, I think it's more like 90% of the time this shot's just getting parried out for a corner. Like it very rarely gets caught, and Martinez has caught it. And corners go in around 3 to 4% of the time. It's around 3.5% of the time. So what Martinez has done there is he's basically just prevented the opposition, so Mexico in this case, having 0.4 extra XG at the end of the game, because they don't get that corner, so they don't get a chance of getting a header on goal. So I think, it's a bit silly from Lee Dixon, really. And the commentary could have easily just been, wow, Martinez made that look really easy, and Argentina are now back on the ball, rather than, oh, wow. Because every time, I bet if he'd have parried that over the bar, Lee Dixon would have been like, wow, he made the most of that, made a bit of a meal of that, and gave the opposition a corner. So if you're going to criticise for doing that, you then have to praise for the other side. That's always my view on goalkeeping, really. I'm happy to see the critique as long as it's justified and sort of well explained, but you've got to then do the praise. You can't just do the critique if you then don't praise them when they do what you are deeming is the right thing to do.
Oh, indeed. I mean, I'd love to see the BBC or ITV punditry panel step between the sticks at the World Cup, and that would be a video we'd all want to watch. But of course, John, there's no hiding place for the pundits, as there's no hiding place for goalkeepers. And some eagle-eyed users of Twitter did spot this phrase from Lee Dixon. With this very, very candid response from one Twitterer, Lee Dixon getting a job as a commentator makes me think I can quite literally achieve anything. It is fair to say that Dixon's analysis has been lacking so far, especially as the Goalkeepers Union podcast document. Goalkeeping, according to Lee Dixon, is just not running about, which to an extent is true. But you'll be interested to know, Lee, that actually there is a really high physical output that goes into being a goalkeeper. It may not be the traditional mile-long jogs at the start of a training session, but nonetheless, sprint work, footwork, lateral movement is a massive part of why someone like Martinez made that type of save. You cannot make a save like that with a one-step push. You cannot make a save like that static. You have to move your feet. And when you watch goalkeepers training session, and this is for the pundits out there, please pay attention to the work being done between cones. Some people don't advocate for cones or using hurdles and things like this because they feel like it makes it unrealistic. But nonetheless, there's a case for isolating movement and make sure that movement is exaggerated to then be able to replicate that and use it in a match to a point where it becomes muscle memory and nothing more. But Dixon wasn't the only person going in for Martinez. Actually, the other one was Paul Robinson, ex-England goalkeeper, 41 appearances. Likewise, in 2008, nearly equal Gordon Banks' record of 7 consecutive clean sheets. Didn't quite make it at that point. But Robinson was keen to point out, in his opinion, that Martinez is not a top-class goalkeeper, and he's not even top level, according to Robinson. There's a reason he was at Arsenal for so long without playing, and that's something that I really would dispute myself, given that Martinez actually, when you look at the facts of the case, on loan at Rotherham, on loan at Reading, put in some of the best performances of his career. He's had an unusual trajectory, I suppose, coming into his first sort of proper starting role at Villa in his late 20s. But nonetheless, Martinez has still got years to go. He's coming into the golden age of being a goalkeeper, that kind of late 20s, early 30s stage. I think Robinson's comments are very unjustified, don't you, John?
Yeah, no, completely. And also, when he did come in at Arsenal, he looked like he'd been there for 10, 15 years, which I think is, you can't critique someone for being sort of put out in the cold, especially when Arsenal had such top international goalkeepers during that time. It wasn't like he was on the bench for people who were getting hammered. He was on the bench for people who were putting 38-game seasons together. So yeah, I think it's super harsh, and it sort of dismisses what he has done late on in his career in terms of winning the Copa America with Argentina and getting the most clean sheets in a Villa Premier League season for Aston Villa, and then winning the FA Cup for Arsenal. It sort of sweeps it all under the carpet, which I think is harsh. Like, while you can, I guess, fairly ask, did he do enough to play at the top level when he was younger? You can't then just dismiss him completely when he's clearly achieved so much, even if it has been, maybe in Paul Robinson's opinion, a few years too late.
I mean, Martinez came out and silenced the critics with great effect in Argentina's round of 16 tie against Australia. John, I mean, when we talk about your one-on-one model, we often talk about different shapes, and Martinez's spread here is really as close you can get to the perfect piece of goalkeeping for a 1v1. Moving out of the goal, larger steps to begin with, then slowing his movement, putting the onus on the attacker, and just holding just as the striker makes contact with the ball, to not firstly disrupt his own movement, keep his body weight forward, and make sure he can execute the shape to an optimum standard. But just that clip there where we stop, I mean, talk us through the shape. It's really something to behold.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And as you said, we have a full one-on-one model at Goalkeeper XG, which basically looks at which shapes are optimal in which circumstances. And here, this is a wonderful use of the spread, and because of just how low he can get his legs. So it's going to be very difficult to meg him in that area because he's got himself so low, but he's still making himself really wide and big. And that's just maximizing. And he's twisted his head a slight amount, but his body has still stayed square. So he's filling as much of the goal as possible. And I think you alluded to it earlier, but it's those 5 or 6 little steps he gets in that really make the difference. If he spreads a yard or two further back, that can go through past his leg, go under his arm, go wherever. But because he gets so close to the Australian attacker, he basically fills the majority of the goal. And yeah, Goalkeeper XG, we find this sort of 1v1 would go in about 40% of the time. So in the whatever that is, with less than 30 seconds left on the clock, 2-1 up, there's a 40% shot for the opposition, and you pull out the save. That's just unbelievable goalkeeping and puts Argentina through into the quarterfinals. And yeah, maybe Paul Robinson will be eating his words a little bit after that moment.
No, indeed. I mean, one person that did reply to Robinson was Neil Cutler, ex-Aston Villa goalkeeper coach, who's just moved on from his role at Villa Park. Really, backing Martinez up, rightly so, because, Martinez coming up big in a moment like this, John, is so underestimated. And I think, people can never quite realize, as we saw with Gonda earlier on in the podcast, who, had very little to do and then perhaps had a slight moment of madness. Martinez is there, for 96.5 minutes under pressure, not only of those in the stadium, but with the knowledge that, you're on TV in front of millions and millions of people around the world. You've got a whole nation behind you expecting, I would say, probably a semi-final or final appearance at the very least, especially with it being Messi's last World Cup. They would, some would probably say that Argentina need a trophy. And Martinez there has made just as much an impact on the game and on Argentina's tournament chances as any goal that they've scored so far. You cannot see a picture, I think, at the World Cup so far that doesn't epitomise how important a goalkeeper is and how fine the technical details are, how kind of unique the physical capacity is of a goalkeeper to make a save like this. And Martinez has summed that all up in one crucial save, I should say. But let's move on from Twitter now, John, because let's get back onto the numbers quickly before we begin to wrap up here. Penalties. We released an article on goalkeeper.com last week talking about England's security, we should say, in the goalkeeping department should it go to penalties. And we found that essentially Jordan Pickford is the man who England are in safest hands with. But talking more widely, John, this is the map here of all the penalties of the World Cup so far and where they've ended up. Give us a little bit of insight into exactly what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a weird one. So, firstly, we've seen some great goalkeeping. So the green points on that map are all the saves by the goalkeepers. The whites are the goals that have gone in. So we've seen 14 penalties and 5 saves. If you look at the sort of XG before the shot struck, so that's basically saying 78% of all penalties go in. So before the ball's even struck, you've got a 78% chance. So we'd have expected about 11 goals based on just having 14 pens. And then the XG after the shot struck means, well, how much power did they put on it and where did they put it? Because if you put it right in the top corner up there at 60 miles an hour, that's going to be a 100%er. That's just never getting saved. Whereas if you put it at like 45 miles an hour, like 2 yards away from the post, a lot of the time that will get saved because the keeper goes the right way, they'll save it. And if it's not actually that far in the corner, they might even get it with their leg if they go the wrong way. So those penalties might only go in 60% of the time. So there's a difference between on the power and placement of how likely they are to go in after the shot struck. And you can see that the placement and power has just been pretty average. It's about 11 goals expected before and 11 after. So we haven't really seen that many great pens at this World Cup. The only one I'd really say is Bale's, which I think our model clocks in as going in about 98% of the time. Because, yeah, to be fair, he's got it pretty high and pretty far in the corner, and Matt Turner had no chance with it, really. But these 5 that are saved, you can see we've got 2 low down there to the goalkeeper's right, 2 down to the goalkeeper's left, and then the Wojciech Szczesny one where it got a little bit of a lift from Messi there with the best save so far. But we can see that goalkeepers are overperforming. They've saved about 2 more penalties than you'd expect. So goalkeepers are on top at the moment, and we'll keep this going throughout all penalty shootouts and everything like that, and see if at the end have goalkeepers sort of won in terms of penalties against the attackers. We'll obviously never see more saves than goals, but are they saving it better than the sort of standard 80 or 80% rate? And yeah, one thing I would also mention is just if you look at this graphic, it's weird that only 4 of them have been raised significantly off the ground. And if we actually look at our Premier League data from this year, we find that about 53% of penalties go low. So basically, it's a coin toss as to whether a striker keeps it along the ground or tries to lift it. But in this tournament, you can see just from this graphic, it's more like 75% have gone low. And I think this goes back to your comment you made about the ball and maybe Kieran Trippier's quote that he said it was sort of a bit like a beach ball and you sort of lose a bit of control. He thinks it's a good ball, but I think he specifically mentioned crossing and floating it high. The trajectory is not what he usually expects. So maybe penalty takers at this World Cup have been doing penalty practice, I imagine, all the time. And they've just decided we're going to have to go low. Because if I do my usual penalty and lift it a bit, there's a big danger of me ballooning it over the bar, which obviously you don't want to see because that turns your 78% chance right down to 0 if you don't hit the target. So potentially that's something to look out for in shootouts. If England or any other country go to them, is are people going to be lifting these penalties, or is this weird trend of 75% of them going low rather than the usual 50% going to continue?
Moving on to our final talking point of today's episode, and it's gloves. The glove league table has been updated, and we're here looking at who is representing each manufacturer the most in the last 16. So the tables have turned slightly from what we last saw in episode 1. Adidas still leading the way in terms of the goalkeepers that have gone through, but of course some big Adidas names have headed out, the likes of Neuer, for example. Nonetheless, we've still got a plethora of, with all due respect, relatively small brands. Matt Turner with West Coast, obviously, they have gone through to the round of 16. Renat's still in there. One keeper, elite. Cells, we have some number 2s in there. Not too many goalkeepers that are starting the tournament this year wearing cells. Adidas still way out ahead, as we mentioned. And obviously Puma on the hands of Jordan Pickford and others are still right up there likewise. John, in terms of your own knowledge of the market and what we've seen at goalkeeper.com so far, it's quite clear to see that the big brands on the world stage are still dominating, and it's interesting to compare that to, for example, the Premier League, where the One Glove have got a very, very big presence. Sales have got a very, very big presence. Of course, Sales are a very established brand, and the One Glove likewise. Definitely growing in their own right. But we're still looking at Roy, Scholl, Sport, Puma really leading the way.
Yeah, no, indeed. And so before this round, so when we started, it was about 70% were dominated by the sort of big 5 brands. 70% of all keepers at the World Cup either had Adidas, Puma, Roy, Scholl, Sport or Nike on their hands. And now actually we've gone into the last stages, it's up to 80%. So we have whittled down more of the smaller brands, you would say, or the less mainstream brands, and kept more of the big brands. So it's one of those things that those guys do just dominate. But it is nice, like you say, to see the smaller brands in there. But if we go on to sort of which brand do we expect to lift the World Cup, which one will be holding the World Cup on that trophy, which I'm sure the brand will make their profile picture as they sort of usually do whenever a World Cup's won and the goalkeeper lifts the trophy aloft. That's a super interesting one, because Elite have Noppert, the Dutch goalkeeper, and it seems like they're one of the strongest teams now. So would we have, even though we've got this big domination from Adidas, Puma, Reusch, Allsport, and Nike, could Elite actually be the glove brand to get their hands on it? I think it's a kind of interesting one. Because if we sort of look across at the other ones, yeah, Nike's probably biggest chances if Allison and Brazil win. Puma's biggest chances maybe Pickford. Maybe there's a bit of England bias there, but maybe it's probably Pickford winning as in terms of a number one who's wearing Puma. And then with Adidas, it's probably between Martinez or Diogo Costa at Portugal, as to hedge their bets to see if they can get through. And then Reusch have probably got Lloris and Simon as the two, so they'll be spotting Spain and France. So it'll be interesting, I think, to see which one goes for it. Who do you think will probably be the glove brand most likely to be lifting that World Cup at the end?
Well, it's an interesting one, because I think looking back at the last few tournaments we've had, say the last 3 World Cups, for example, 2010 we had Casillas wearing Umbro, which is a unique one. 2014, obviously Neuer in the Adidas Predators. 2018 we had Lloris in Reusch. I think this year the Netherlands are looking strong. I agree with you, John. I would love nothing more than to see a brand like Elite getting their gloves on the World Cup trophy. I think it'd be fantastic. So for the underdog story, which we're all about at goalkeeper.com, I'm putting my money behind Elite at the moment. If I'm being slightly more realistic, I would say I imagine we're looking at potentially Pickford. I wouldn't rule him out at all, I think. I'd also say that Allison and Nike do have a chance to re-establish a bit of dominance, because obviously, as we've mentioned before, Nike have taken a little bit away from their focus on goalkeeper gloves and goalkeeper products generally in the last few years. So getting Allison his hands back on the World Cup trophy would be a big coup for the brand, and obviously Brazil likewise. But John, I think that brings us to the end of the episode today. We've had some interesting talking points, of course. No one loves anything more than looking through Twitter. No one loves anything more than putting stats behind the points you get from people on Twitter, I think is one way of putting it. From me, that's goodbye. From John.
Yep, goodbye. I hope you tune into the next time, and see you again.
Fantastic. So that's With Glove. See you later.